Buddha. He was a king before he became Buddha. But why couldn't he be a Buddha and a king at the same time?
So the Buddha actually was not a king, he was a prince. But it's believed that in many of his previous lives he was a king, and then he would relinquish his kingship and become an ascetic in a forest and meditate. The problem of a king is that a king has a responsibility. And part of the responsibility is to punish. So the Buddha didn't want to be a king and have the responsibility to punish. He didn't want to be the king and have the responsibility to enjoy sensual pleasures. A king has the responsibility to bring forth an offspring. And it's not easy to bring an offspring without sensual pleasures.
As a king, you can make new rules.
You can make new rules, yes.
So you can say it doesn't have to be an offspring. I can still live my normal life that I want to live as a Buddha. And as a punishment, he could have made bad people meditate and go into a monastery, for example, for a certain amount of time, so they can reach enlightenment, which wouldn't be a punishment.
That is pretty difficult. Actually, the Buddha's dad, who was a king, attained enlightenment without abandoning his kingship. After the Prince Gautama became a Buddha as an ascetic. So, yes, it is absolutely true what you're saying. A king can meditate, a king can become enlightened, but to become a Buddha is not as easy, you know, because becoming a Buddha involves that you do not have a teacher. So when the Buddha had to become a Buddha, not only that he would just do something, but he would have to invent it. And to invent the right path toward enlightenment is a totally different story from just following somebody's teaching and then attaining the fruits of it. So the Buddha to be saw that this would not be easy for him to find the solution, to find the freedom from birth, old age, sickness, and death. And as a king, and he decided to become an ascetic because he thought that this would be a better way. Now, in the Buddha's time, we always need to look at the situation which was there. So there was no Buddha's teachings. There was no teachings about anatta, about not self. There was no explanation how to meditate. No explanation how to meditate concentration for the lay people. I mean, for the kings. There was no explanation how to meditate vipassana, insight. There was no Goenka at that time. There was no Sayadaw, no nothing, nobody. So the only way at that time, if you wanted to meditate, would be that you really relinquish everything you have, including your hair, and you go to the forest and meditate. And first he would be following ascetic teachers. Those ascetic teachers would not teach you anything if you are a king or a prince, They would teach you only when you come there to the forest, memorize their scriptures. In the Buddha's time, if you want to meditate, you first have to memorize hundreds of, not pages, but it would be pages today. You would have to memorize a huge amounts of text, which actually you hear from the teacher, and you have to repeat. And then when you have memorized it immaculately, then you would be allowed to try it out. So that we don't have that today, fortunately for some. But in the Buddha's time, that was the way it is. You have to become an ascetic to be eligible to learn these deep teachings. And then you still would have to be ascetic to have the environment to meditate, according to that teaching and with the teacher. So he became an ascetic, he followed the teachers, but they didn't teach him what he was seeking for. So he then left the ascetics and he followed the traditional way of becoming enlightened. Now there was nobody who would be well known to have become fully enlightened through those techniques, but the belief was that if you follow those strong self-torturing ascetics, we say self-mortifying training, it was believed that you may actually become enlightened. So the Buddha to be was then training himself in not eating, he was training himself in not breathing, and he was training himself in different ways, in the way it was known at that time. It would not be intelligible for a king to train in those techniques, because the king cannot afford to be weak and withered. You know, the king needs to be powerful to make decisions, and he needs to be fresh. Now the ascetic doesn't. The ascetic can be weak and withered, it doesn't matter, because he's just on the way. So he tried the practices and they also didn't help him. So as the practices didn't help him, he thought, okay, so let's try out the middle path. So then he found the tree of enlightenment, the Bodhi tree, and he stayed there, you know, for some time, and he was meditating under the tree, sitting on grass and working with the lustful thoughts. The first problem was the lust, you know. The Mara, the tempter, appeared, you know, as our scriptures suggest, with his 3 daughters. Now Mara is the most powerful god right under the God who believes that he created the world. So in Buddhism we believe that there is a God who believes that he created the world, but the Buddha explains that the God is wrong. And the scriptures explain that the Buddha then appeared at the supposed God creator, and the God creator then accepted and paid respects to the Buddha as a better being, as a wiser being than the God himself. And there's not just one story, there will be different stories in different ways. But that's just to understand, but just for you to understand how we take the Mara, the tempter. He's in his powers, he's right below that God. So he can even approach that God and even, you know, influence that God, you know. But he himself, the Mara, the tempter, is still one of the gods of the worlds of sensual pleasures. So we have 20 heavenly realms, and 6 of those heavenly realms involve sensual pleasures. And the other 14 consist of enjoying... No, we have 26 heavenly realms. And these 26 heavenly realms, out of them 6 heavenly realms consist of enjoying sensual pleasures, and the remaining 20 consist of enjoying your meditation pleasures. So there's no sensual pleasure. Absolutely no sensual pleasures for the highest heavenly realms. Just as an interesting point, there is no sexual intercourse in heavens, even in the 6 heavenly realms, whereas which are based on sensual pleasures. There is absolutely no sexual intercourse, because that's understood as coarse. They have sexual relationships, but they are not nothing comparable to what you would understand as sexual intercourse. They touch each other, but not by genitals, because they don't have any genitals. So that's for heaven. So if you ever wanted to go to heaven, now you know what to expect. But for them, their sensual pleasures are much more blissful than the sexual pleasures in this world. Anyway, Mara, the tempter, approached the Buddha to be and suggested to him his 3 daughters. So immensely beautiful heavenly beings. And the Buddha then he imagined them as getting old. and withered. He saw them with all their deficiencies, and he therefore released himself from all lust and attachment. Through the release, he was then later able to attain enlightenment. So this would not be easy for a king, you know, because the Buddha, to be under the Bodhi tree, he was still in the course of research. He was still there going to find what's the right way. So for a king, this would be immensely difficult and most probably impossible.
And experiment after he became Buddha, why did he return home?
Aha, that would be an unnecessary trouble, because the Buddha himself, as a Buddha, had already so many duties from the Buddha's point of view to care for the teachings and for the community of monks, that adding to it also the duty of a king would be, I think, actually unnecessary, because the duties that the Buddha was fulfilling on his during his 45 years journey were already quite demanding. You know, he had to deal with first several, later hundreds, later thousands, and then hundreds of thousands or even millions of monks who were doing all kinds of stuff. You know, some of them enjoying with women, some of them enjoying with men, some of them enjoying in other ways, some of them not enjoying at all, some of them enjoying in anger, in causing bad deeds. Some would be stealing, some would be killing, some would be telling lies about their attainments, some would be enjoying sensual pleasures in various ways, some would be breaking those 5 rules, and so on. So the Buddha spent quite a lot of time explaining to the monks what is the right way, what is the way that leads to enlightenment. Now, if it was so easy for a king to become enlightened, the Buddha would most probably not need to establish a monastic order. It's because it is very difficult for any layperson to become enlightened. And it still is difficult for a monk to become enlightened. So for the Buddha, the monastic order was an opportunity for any human being to attain that what the Buddha himself attained. And if there were any lay people who would be interested in what the Buddha teaches and they would like to try it also at home, then the Buddha was open to share it. But it was not that easy for lay people, you know, to sit down, you know, for 8 hours or 10 hours every day, sit or walk or whatever is the posture for meditation, and really dedicate themselves to the inward investigation. So the Buddha was offered to be the king. He was offered to take over several kingdoms, but the Buddha never accepted it. The Buddha was the king of Dharma, and that, I think, is much higher position. He was the king of the teachings of the truth. He was the king of peace and wisdom. I think that's better, you know? And he was leading his students, for a king's subjects, for the Buddha students, toward that peace and wisdom and the truth.